In this short little video, I'd like to take a moment and address one of the things that often happens in my workplace, maybe it happens in yours, that is called task paralysis. That idea that you have so many tasks, so many things on your to-do list, so many emails, that we can literally be paralyzed, not into inaction, mind you, but that we're foggy and not sure where to begin or how to move forward into any endeavor. Well, that's what this video here, a slide presentation, will show. I've subtitled this, The Root Reason Why Tasks Do Not Get Done Timely and How to Fix This Forever. It's a simple plan, and I hope you enjoy it. First, let me ask a question. What is a task? Let me read from the box I've written. Regardless of what any book might say, a task is not something you do, it's something that is completed. When you arrive at the completion of a necessary action, then you have your task. It's important to understand this. Tasks are not what you are going to do, it's what the future result of done looks like. A key idea to remember is this: even one simple task requires multiple action steps. The takeaway from this slide is just simply this, that one of the fundamental issues we have with a task or task lists is that we think a task is something to do, but what we have really written is what the definition of that task being done looks like. So we're describing the actions that would lead to a task completing. So to reiterate one line, tasks are not what you are going to do, it's what the future result of done looks like. One thing that I would like to clarify though is what is a task and what is a project? One task is simply multiple actions in a linear line. Two or more tasks, that's a project, which would be therefore multiple actions in separate or discrete lines. Two or more tasks can be episodic in nature or they can be concurrent. That is, they can follow one right after the other, or they can happen or need to happen at the same time. There are multiple actions, whether they are mental or physical, that we need to do in a linear progression to bring an action to its done state. And you would have a project if you had more than one of those that needed to, at their end, converge into a single final act. Moving forward then, there are three things you need and I need to do to bring a task to its done state. We need to gather all of the pieces needed to complete the task. How many times do you and I begin a task only to realize we don't know who we're going to call? We don't have the email address if we need to communicate with someone. Maybe there's files or folders. Maybe you've left them at home or maybe someone else has them in a different office. So before any task can be accomplished, we need to make sure we're gathering all the pieces, and there are pieces, needed to complete the task. Secondly, we actually want to do the putting together of all of these pieces. That is, once pieces are gathered, we need to do. We need to actually do the things that connect all of this stuff together. And the third thing is we need to finally understand, do we need to contact someone? Are we waiting on others to bring us parts of this puzzle? And primarily though, when a task is finished, it could be for our own benefit, but it probably needs to be communicated to another. And who is that? So to summarize, there are three things you and I need to do to bring a task to done. Gather all the pieces that are required to complete the task. Once the pieces are gathered, we actually do whatever the action is to complete that. And then we need to assess who we'll need to contact or wait on once the task is complete. Said another way, we gather the pieces, and it's very much like a manual that you have when you buy a drawer or a chest of drawers or a bed or a bookshelf. If it's done well, the parts sheet will always list what's needed to complete the project. And what do? I mean, the parts are often mixed up in one bag and you lay them out and separate them, and certainly you want to make sure you have the number of pieces that are required. How many times have we got into a project only to find out we don't have what we need and it stalls everything and the situation is worse than had we not started it at all? Then we need to figure out what to do with the pieces once gathered. I purposely chose this visual for this reason. There are no words. If you really have a clear vision of what needs to be done, the pieces fit together as if automatically. That is to say, you don't have to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse what needs to be done. You see how the pieces fit together and you move forward. In other words, we're visualizing. We're visualizing what needs to be done and what that would look like once it's done. So there could be multiple steps within an action for one task. Thirdly, we do need to remember to assess who we'll need to wait on or contact. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we just need to make sure those we are accountable to know that we have made forward progress. Plan the moment of execution. If you plan it, do it. If you do it, it's done. This is a simple rule that I like to follow, although very imperfectly. In the red box we can read, at this moment, the only reason why you and I would freeze in face of a task is because we haven't taken the time to inventory the parts or items needed. But once we have that, it should be the easiest thing in the world to actually work on the actions, one by one, until they're all completed. In that linear fashion, that is in fact the task. In this slide I asked the question, what about actual projects? So far I've talked about a task being a linear line of multiple actions. But what if we have two tasks? Well, then we have a project, which would indicate we have multiple lines or separate lines that have those actions in a linear form. Actual projects are no different than what has been just described as one task. It's just that there is more than one. Thus, more than one task is either episodic in nature or it's concurrent. That is to say, they come one right after the other, episodic, or they're taking place concurrently. Even so, unless delegated, you and I can only work on one task at a time effectively. The idea of multitasking is truly a myth. When someone asks if you and I can multitask, what they're asking and what they're truly talking about is a project, multitask, more than one task. And the idea that they're getting at is, can you organize those separate linear lines, each composed of multiple actions, therefore each of them a task, and complete them on time? That also lets them know, whoever's asking this question, do you understand the nature of confluence? Like two rivers coming together to form a larger river, often a project has multiple tasks that must in some way, in fact it always must in some way, confluent together, make a confluence, and reach its appointed end. So what we have here in the 3 bullet points, a reiteration, one task equals multiple actions in a line. Two tasks, a project, are multiple actions in separate lines, and those lines can be either episodic, occurring one after the other, or in fact they can be concurrent, and they often are, needing to take place at the same time. So, visually saying that yet one more time, projects are more than one task. They can be episodic, we do one then the other, or they can be concurrent, and that is to say, if you look at this picture, it's perfect because it is one stream flowing out into two lines, or looking at it backwards, these are two lines of actions, two discrete lines flowing or confluencing back into one. And that's the nature of a project. We'll always see a project branch out because there's several lines, multiple lines that we're working on, but a project is never complete unless they confluence back together into one stream or one path. Now, regardless if you are on the timeline that you've set for yourself or your boss or a superior has set for you, we do always need to solve the accountability conundrum, which is to say, you and I need to be ready at any given moment to give an account of where we are on every single project or task we're working on. Depending on your workplace environment, your superior might be under heat to give an account of your performance at any given time, whether or not that fits your schedule and whether or not your schedule is up to date or if you're behind. Certainly if you're behind, you can expect calls and it's not pretty. However, your superior may need you to give an account at a moment's notice because he himself or she herself are having to find out from someone else giving them heat what's the status of your project. So, how do we solve this conundrum? Here's a solution that I have found that works exceptionally well. First, we want to always be ready to provide a status update. Now, how do we do that? Often, people can do this with Evernote or some tool online. That's helpful. But I can be asked in elevators. I can be asked walking down a hall or in a restaurant getting a phone call. I need to have with me, for me personally, and it's entirely old school, a binder with pockets. That's what I use to keep each project and all of the updated paperwork in that separate from all the other projects I'm doing. So just yesterday I was called to account for where I'm at in a particular project. I flipped in my binder to this pocket that has it, was able to give an updated account of what that is. Now, for many superiors, that you even have it that organized is about all they need to see, that you're on it. However, there's more to it than that. So using software is essential, I think, in our modern era to track tasks movement. In this little iconic graphic here, you see swim lanes, and that is these columns with cards in each one. That's typical project management software, but whether it's Trello or others that you're using for software, the idea is this: a task list is not enough. It never is. You have to show in time where a particular set of tasks in a given project exist. To the far left, you might have things yet to be done. In the column in the middle, you might have things that are in progress. And to the far right, you might have a column that exists to show what has been completed. That you can give an account of this is important because these tasks are swimming or moving through time. And so you want to watch them move and be able to give an account of that. Now, what I would do then is print out the status of that. You can do that in a number of ways, usually with any software program, and then bring that printout back to the binder and insert it into the pocket for the project that we're going to update. One thing, though, that I want to bring up here, a colored picture of a partial bust of Winston Churchill. The idea is this. I'm going to just read this. Aim for being a greater you than you think you have it within you to be, cross that out, do. Why am I even bringing this up in the context of a conversation about accountability? Well, it's simple. The first person you must be accountable to is your own self. It sounds trite. You may have read this in 1,000 different books on success and leadership, not to disparage any of them. Many of them are great. But it's just the truth. Look, if you and I think we have it within ourselves to be greater than we can actually believe we can be, then our work will always show that forward movement, that upward and onward movement. But I've crossed out the word be. That's what we would assume would be at the end of a quote like this. Aim for being a greater you than you think you have it within you to be. Instead, look at it like this. Aim for being a greater you than you think you have it within you to do. Because you see, like Winston Churchill as an example, his reputation and his greatness in history was based on his actions. He was, in our opinion, great, but he is great because of a set of actions that set him apart at a very critical and crucial time in world history. Thus, the bust, statues, and all of the great acclaim you and I have heard in the 21st century, even for him. So here we are. That's the idea. You and I need to aim for that greater than who we think we are status. Because if you and I do that, we'll actually watch ourselves start acting in a way that brings us closer to that vision. And it is all about vision. And so when you are looking at how you're being accountable, the motivation for being so organized and accountable is simply that you have a greater vision of yourself than even your bosses do. If you vision and envision yourself at that level, you will begin to act like and perform the actions necessary to be there. And often that will translate into a high level of accountability. Now, moving forward, 99% of all failures come from people who make excuses. Greatness does not actually happen to people who make excuses. I think we all hate when we have other people make excuses about something. They might be sincere. You can see they're coming from a place of hurt or lack of knowledge. But even so, there's a part of a black and white issue here. You're either a person that makes excuses or you're not. So George Washington Carver, back in his day, 99% of all failures come from people who make excuses. And I think that may be overstated, but the idea is, the kernel of truth there is, don't play the blame game. It's up to you. Even if it's not your fault, something didn't go right, taking responsibility for that is the surest way to receive good accountability. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, great German Lutheran theologian in the World War II era, who, as a pastor and professor, had a moral dilemma. Is it morally responsible for him as a Christian, as a pastor, to take part in a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler? He writes from this experience, and he writes, "Action springs not from thought, but from a readiness for responsibility. This really gives a lot of power to that. Michael Korda writes, success on any major scale requires you to accept responsibility. In the final analysis, the one quality that all successful people have is the ability to take on responsibility. I actually love this quote if we can accept that his version of or definition of the word success may be different than mine or yours. If he's talking about monetary success, I think this is a shallow comment. If he's talking, though, about that sense of greatness, that ability to serve your company, the people you work for, your constituency, your stakeholders, if you see that vision of yourself greater than you can possibly be at the moment, in that view, I love what he says. Success on any major scale requires you to accept responsibility. In the final analysis, the one quality that all successful people have is the ability to take on responsibility. As a reminder, my final reminder, I've created my rule, the Sparks rule, and this is hard one. Prepare and update your binder of projects after every action, or whatever it is you're using specifically to be accountable at the drop of a hat at the moment's notice. If you do this, this permits you to be called into account at any moment. For the moment that you are not prepared to do this, that is precisely the moment you will be called to give an account. Isn't that so true? I try to keep this in mind because if I am prepared and my stakeholders or superiors always see that I'm prepared, then less often am I asked where I'm at on a particular project. Funny how that works. However, the moment I let that slip, or I'm not prepared as I ought for any given number of reasons, that's obviously the moment that someone's going to call me into an office to give an account. So there it is. This is my little tutorial on task paralysis and how to avoid it forever. I hope it's been helpful. This is Jeff Sparks. Thanks so much.